away, Janelle. Thank you.
Kia ora. O tēnā tātou i te whānau, nau mai hara mai ki tēnei kōrero i tēnei rā. He uri tēnei no tainui waka no whaingaroa a hau ko Janelle Reki Waka tōku ingoa. Morena, everyone. It's lovely to have you with us today. Thank you for coming along for a bit of a kōrero today around te ao Māori perspectives on identity. I'm going to just start us with a wee karakia, a blessing that simply is translated as from confusion comes understanding, from understanding comes unity, we are interconnected. So it's quite an appropriate one for us to have today in terms of our kaupapa. So I will say that and then we'll get started. Unuhia te pō whiri marama, tomo kia te ao whatu tangata, tātai ki runga, tātai ki raro, tātai ahorau, haumie, huie, tai ki. Kia ora. Lovely to have you all with us. Welcome along. My name is Janelle Reki Waka. I am one of the wonderful team who is on the Digital Identity New Zealand Executive Council. I've been on the Executive Council for, must be coming up a year, I think, might be this month, as it's been about a year. And I have loved my time on the Executive Council. I wear a number of hats, but primarily, I guess I'm a Te Tiriti o Waitangi or treaty and cultural competencies consultant, and I work with a number of different organisations to support them in that space. I'm also an educator, and I work with a number of schools around the effective use of digital technologies. More recently, I've just been appointed also to the Digital Equity Coalition Aotearoa Stewardship Group. So I'm also a member of that wonderful whānau. So that's the sort of very quick rundown of me and where I come from and the type of work that I do. And in my time with Digital Identity New Zealand, I have been supporting them, I guess, to just understand identity from a te ao Māori perspective. And what I can say is that that's really multifaceted and layered, and it's different depending on iwi and hapu perspectives. There are some things that I thought I could share with you all today, and I invite a conversation and at the end of it, but I'm just going to jump into screen share, and please do ask any questions if you like as we go along. I just wanted to share first of all with you a couple of articles that just as a bit of context, I found this one, and I can give you the links if you're interested in reading them. And I won't read all of this, but this is by Jocelyn Dudding. And I just wanted to read a little bit of a paragraph. Around the 19th century, she is talking about Māori and photographs. And she was saying here that in and around this time, there was some distrust of photography by Māori kaumātua or my ancestors, chiefs as well, due to its apparently magical properties and the fear that a person's mauri or life force would be captured or damaged in the process, as it was felt that you could not replicate a subject's image without diminishing the person. However, a little bit later on, there was a gradual sort of reversal in this thought, which resulted in increasing adoption by Māori of available prints. This article goes on to talk about the importance of photographs after this period in processes such as tangihanga or funerals for our people, where photographs of people that had passed would be displayed around a coffin during a tangihanga, and then they would be put up on a wall, often in marae, and to show whakapapa, to show sort of the genealogy of the whānau that were connected to that marae. And I wanted to share that for a wee bit of context. And I'll circle back to this, but I also found another article just recently, and this is from March of this year. And again, I won't read the whole article, but basically the article is talking about a couple of young Māori boys aged 14 and 15 who were in Wanganui on the main street waiting out the front of cash converters, and their koro, their grandfather, was inside cash converters, and they were just waiting for him outside when they were stopped by some police officers and questioned about some money that, where's the bag of money? And they, continued to say, had a discussion with the police officers, after which the police officers asked them to stand still, take their hats off and look into their phones, and they were photographed by the police officers. And this article goes on to talk about police using an app basically to take intel notings around anything and anything of interest. It doesn't have to be crime related. It can just be photographs of people and information about those people, what they're doing, noting personal details, digital images, descriptions of clothing, where a person is sitting inside a vehicle, numbers of people around them, phone numbers from from mobiles, etc., etc. And it goes on to say that this app is building quite a number of sort of profiles, I guess, on lots of different people. And I wanted to share those as a contrast before I sort of jumped into this presentation, because I think if we have those two things in mind, while I sort of share some of these things, it might help to give some context. So I'm going to start with talking about Te Tiriti o Waitangi, or the Treaty of Waitangi, and in particular Article 2, which is rangatiratanga. And Article 2 is about Māori self-determination, authority and agency. In essence, Article 2 said that Māori would have the right to determine for themselves. So the Crown recognised the rangatiratanga, or the absolute sovereignty of our chiefs, to enact their chiefliness, if you like, to live as we had lived as hapu. And the treaty being a partnership document, Article 2 was about Māori having the ability to continue to live as they had and to govern and self-determine for themselves, while the New Zealand government and colonisation would look after any current and new settlers that would come to Aotearoa. So it was in essence a partnership document that said, we're going to do us and you can do you as you've always done, and we'll live harmoniously together. And we know that that didn't go as smoothly as we'd hoped, but it's important to understand what Article 2 is about. It's about Māori being able to assert their own their self-determined for themselves and have their own authority. So with that in mind, what I will confidently say, if this hasn't occurred to you already, and I'm sure that it has actually, is that what we know is that one definition of identity will not work for everyone. That those who are in the business, I guess, of designing, developing, delivering identity-related solutions will hopefully have come to the conclusion that one definition of identity is not going to be inclusive to all people. And in fact, Indigenous perspectives of identity, particularly here in Aotearoa, must be taken into account. And what we know is that the home people of Aotearoa, the Indigenous people of Aotearoa Māori, will need to be part of a conversation around what identity might look like for them. And so that those who are designing identity solutions can take that into consideration. What we don't want is identity solutions that are going to unintentionally have barriers to particularly tangata whenua of Aotearoa. That's not going to be in anyone's best interest. So we're going to need to take in multiple perspectives of what identity is and what it might mean for tangata whenua. What we have had is a number of non-Māori organizations, people, entities who have already developed identity solutions and designed identity solutions on behalf of Māori. So we're talking about identity as defined by non-Māori for Māori. And there's some issues with that. And not least, but most importantly, it will absolutely contain inherent bias, because they're created within systems that have historically been designed to assimilate Māori people. So we live in Aotearoa, and whether we appreciate this or not, much of the systems and structures within our country were developed and originated from the premise that we were to assimilate Māori people into European culture, into the dominant culture. That was the premise of colonization. And so designing anything on behalf of Māori within systems that already have historic and systemic assimilating policies with them, it is not going to work. So we almost have to zoom the microscope out to see the structures and systems of which we're building within and which we're designing within, because sometimes that inherent bias is not always easy to spot, but it is there in much of those systems. Sadly, from a Māori perspective, identity solutions designed by non-Māori are designed by the colonizers. Whether we like that or not, we've got a deep history and understanding of our Indigenous people that that systems that exist within governments and things like that, although we have seen great progress, still come from the colonizing mindset. So there's a resurgence at the moment amongst many Māori and non-Māori around how we decolonize the systems and processes. How do we decolonize our minds? How do we decolonize our hearts? And then decolonize our actions, so that we are sitting alongside those at the table that need to be there, that need to be part of the conversation. There's just a mismatch of worldviews, perspectives, and values. And already I shared that article earlier around how many of my ancestors viewed photography. And I've really tried to think about this. If you were seeing photography for the first time as a Māori person, that just being confronted with your own image captured on a piece of paper would have been really challenging, because for Māori, our mauri, our life force, our wairua, our spirit, our mind, all of those things exist within us. So to see almost a duplication of ourselves on a piece of paper would have been really frightening. And there would have been concern about, how did you take that from me? How did you take my image and have you taken some of my mauri and some of my life force on that piece of paper? So I actually totally understand how frightening that would have been for our ancestors. And equally, I understand for those taking photos who would have known about photos and understood the science behind how cameras work and all of those things, would have found that just ridiculous, that they were so frightened of these photographs. So again, it's just a different worldview. And if perhaps the person taking the photograph had a deeper understanding of the worldview of those he was photographing, there might have been able to be a conversation and support and a bridge of understanding to bring to help and support those who were feeling fearful, and the barrier of photographing them was certainly there. So yeah, the mismatch of worldviews is real. And, I often think about the play school analogy. Anyone who's been in New Zealand or grew up in New Zealand will know that we used to have a TV show called Play School. And basically every day you would look through the round window or the square window and it would change, or the oblong window or the rectangle window. And I always sort of suggest to people, sometimes you have to take a step back and change the window that you're looking through, because you're so used to looking through a square window, you've forgotten that you're looking through a square window. So you have to take that step back and say, oh, wow, I can see the square window I've been looking through. It's like changing the lenses in your glasses. Or the first step is the awareness that everybody wears glasses and that their lenses are slightly different. So, you know, that mismatch of worldviews is really important. The truth, whether we wish to acknowledge it or not, is that there is still a huge mistrust amongst Māori of anything that is developed on their behalf without them being part of the conversation. Backdoor deals have not served my people well. Closed door conversations have not served my people well. And history reminds us that that a piece of paper or a contract or somebody's word is not enough. And so those scars still run very deep. And it's really important for us to acknowledge that we are not an old country. We are still a young country, that the generation of which my father's generation, you know, of children who were strapped at school for speaking Māori is still alive. Those scars still walk around and pass us in the street. And that's really important for us to acknowledge, that the trauma of colonization, the trauma of assimilation, and the trauma that has very much means that mistrust is still alive and well amongst many Māori. So how do we navigate that? If we genuinely want to develop identity solutions that are going to work for all, and in particular be inclusive of Māori, we need to first acknowledge that mistrust exists and navigate our way carefully through that. So relationships is the answer there. And the more time you invest in the relationships, the better outcome it's going to be. And I'm reminded of a really powerful saying that always sort of sits well in my heart. Everything moves at the speed of trust. Everything. So if you're wondering why we're not getting traction, we haven't got enough trust. If we're not moving fast enough, if we're not getting to the milestones as we need to, then we need to go back to the relationship table and continue to invest in trust. The other part of this is that for Māori in general, we've lost so much. We've lost so much. Language, culture, identity, customs, history, practices, knowledge. We've lost so much of that through the process of colonization and assimilation. And we are fiercely fighting to regain it back, to retain what we do have left, and to regain as much of that knowledge back. And that's important to know and understand, because it means we're a little bit protective. We're a little bit fearful and protective of the little that we have left, because we have lost so much. So navigating that is going to be important as well. You know, I've sort of alluded to this already, but the systems and processes in Aotearoa weren't designed for Māori people to navigate successfully. They were genuinely not designed for that purpose. They were designed to assimilate them. So these are the systems and processes. You must learn how to navigate them as they are, and in the process of doing that, you will be assimilated into dominant culture. That is rule number one in the colonization playbook. That's how that worked. And I've got a photo here of the Karioi infant class, or probably what we would call a new entrance class now. And as you can see, these kids are varying ages, so they're probably just beginning school. And I find this photo really ironic, and that's why I have it on this slide. So many ironic things about this photo. First of all, there's a map in the background that only has Europe on it, so that's interesting in of itself. But secondly, what I find really ironic about these, they're the beautiful Māori kids in here, and it's hard to tell, but it does look like there might be a couple of non-Māori kids as well in this classroom. They're holding up a slate board with pretty much identical pictures, which means they've been directed to do something exactly the same in the first instance. But what I find interesting is, from what I can tell from the photos, it's a fish and a snail that they've drawn on these slate boards. It's a little bit difficult, but certainly the fish is easier to tell. I think the second thing is a snail. And what I find really interesting is I keep thinking to myself, imagine what's going through the minds of some of these kids who will, some of them, maybe many of them, maybe all of them, in their lifetime already possibly have caught, held, and seen in a natural habitat hundreds of fish, and probably know this is not what fish looks like, actually look like in real life. This is not exactly what snails look like in real life. But this is assimilation, right? I'm going to tell you what a fish looks like, and you're going to draw it as I tell you. And this is what's so telling about a photograph like this. Assimilation isn't always obvious. Assimilation quite often is disguised in what we assume is everyday practices. So you really do have to, as I said, take that step back. Don't look at the square window. Try and move around and at least acknowledge that there's a round window on the other side of the building that others are looking through. I and many others will be very pro the movement that is growing momentum by Māori for Māori. So solutions, identity solutions that support Māori people to grow in their Māoritanga. Identity solutions that are going to benefit Māori people, developed by Māori for Māori. Our language, identity and culture informs the design, informs the intent, and informs the practice. It is just true that if Māori were to design identity solutions, it is just true that they will likely work better for me as Māori, because they will have been looking through the same lens. So that might pose a challenge for non-Māori working in this space. And it doesn't mean you don't have a place in this space, because you absolutely do, and you will have valuable knowledge and expertise. It means that we need to ask a very simple question of ourselves when we are in this design space. Whose voice is missing from this conversation? Just asking ourselves that. Who's missing? Who's not at the table? Whose voice can't be heard? And then attempting to get everybody at the table that needs to be at the table. The other thing we can do is be an effective ally and support Māori to grow and design their own identity solutions for their people. How do we be a good ally? How do we koha our expertise and knowledge and work alongside Māori to develop solutions that will work best for them? I just want to finish on this. I have been working alongside the DINZ Executive Council to develop our own Te Tiriti o Waitangi action plan, and I just wanted to share with you after many iterations, and I'm going to be honest, there may be many more to come, but at the moment, this is our current version of our belief statement here at DINZ. Te Tiriti o Waitangi asserts to have equitable partnerships between Māori and non-Māori, as well as empowering Māori to have rangatiratanga or self-determination. Both Māori and non-Māori worldviews of identity should inform our intent and mahi in DINZ. Therefore, we will seek to empower Māori to have governorship and self-determination, or kāwanatanga and rangatiratanga. And our statement of intent, Digital Identity New Zealand is committed to being tiriti honouring by giving mana to Te Tiriti o Waitangi and being an effective treaty partner with Māori. So I wanted to share that with you, because we've been on a journey and we've worked really hard in this space to get our mind into a space that is going to create equitable outcomes. And we know that here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, equitable outcomes need to have Māori at the table for that conversation, because equity will look and feel different for everyone. So the first conversation we need to have is, What do you need from me? How can I help you? What support can I be in order for you to achieve equity? And if we have that conversation with each other and we ask those questions of each other, I think we're going to start to have wānanga, or a deep and rich debate that is going to support all of us in this space. Okay. I just want to finish on this. The Indigenous people around the world, but certainly it's true here in Aotearoa, Indigenous people through the process of colonisation and of course assimilation had their language, culture and identity stripped from them. Many of them had no control over that. Many cultures managed to survive in spite of those things. However, that is true. It was systematically and deliberately stripped from them. It was not our fault. We were not there. You and I were not there. That was not our fault. Nor should we take that on and feel deeply remorseful for that. There's a difference between feeling remorse and feeling empathy. I think we can have empathy. And what I do want to say is, although not our fault, it is our responsibility. We're here now, and our responsibility is to take that forward and ensure that we do better than those that came before us, because we know better, and we're talking to those around us to make sure that we know better. Okay, I'm going to stop my screen share. And just allow a bit of discussion time, really. I wanted to share some stuff, but I also wanted to just create an opportunity for discussion for you all. So thank you for allowing me the microphone for a little bit. But any questions, any wonderings, any conversations?
That's lovely. Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. And I think certainly for me, having been away for a while, it's great to be reminded and to understand that perspective better. And the thing is, here we are with the Digital Identity Trust Framework Bill, Digital Identity Services Trust Framework Bill, and there are certainly the early drafting of the bill does show a recognition of the elements in which you speak, but it'll be interesting to see if it's capable. I believe it is capable of being translated into practice. I certainly hope so. In my own mind, I have a sense of that, but might just come back to that. Anya, Joanne, John, Alan Mayo was here. He's dropped out again. Any thoughts, questions, comments?
I always have comments.
Of course you do. Yes.
Yeah, so a few things that I picked up in your presentation. That view about photographs of Indigenous people and the stealing of the soul thing. If Māori have moved on from that, then they're better off than a number of other Indigenous cultures. That actually is still well alive in many other cultures. So, a lot of the stuff that I work in, I'm working in sort of, trying to build systems that are suitable for all, European, Māori, etc. And I do find that using sort of Māori as a cornerstone, but also acknowledging other cultures as well, is if you build for them, you end up with better for everybody. So that leads me to another thing of your statement about, we weren't there when all this happened. So saying that there aren't people who are non-Māori that don't understand Māori in today's environment is, I think, a little short-sighted. There are some of us that have grown up in a multicultural environment who are more multiculturally sensitive than colonizers were. So I think it's about finding and aligning with those people and using them to get the nail in the door and lever it open. Because everything that I've been designing, which I think it would be great if I could sit down with you and show you what I've been building, because I think you would be, I think you'd find that approach is a very open approach. I mean, down to the point that I always keep making it when I say it's not about identity, and identity needs to be shoved over here because identity is a different thing. And we're talking actually about something different. And when we talk about something different and understand what that is, actually, I won't say the problems go away. Different problems are able to be seen, and you end up solving some more interesting things, and you enable identity to actually exist in its own thing, and all those varied definitions of it to sit side by side without causing any conflict about what we're trying to do, which is both useful but also generates a whole second conversation. So yeah, I think, and the ledge, the bill, we could have done better.
Oh, it's not all over yet, right? That's what the select committee process is, because we've only just got, I don't actually think that it's actually finished the introduction. I heard that the introduction is actually going to be completed today. So we haven't, we've got the select committee process in the first reading. So we've got plenty of chance, plenty of time to, I won't say plenty, but we have a window of time.
I mean, I've been pushing, because I've been on the periphery of that project all the time, and I've kept pushing them and kept pushing them, but they won't take it as far as I keep trying to push them to go. They keep coming back, and some of that is this needing to align with the rest of the world, and of course that's assuming the rest of the world's doing it right, but the rest of the world, it would be contrary to a Māori or ethnic view of things. So that worries me, that we aren't, that instead of taking the lead position, we're to a certain extent, we are leading a bit, but we're not willing to really push the boundary. We're doing a very sort of, we're not getting there, and I don't think we'll get the solution that's best for everybody in the direction that it's being pushed by some louder voices.
Janelle, what's your, do you have an initial reaction to Joanne's comment?
Yeah, I have actually been invited with a number of other people to give a little bit of feedback some months ago on some of the processes that are going through with the trust bill. I have lots of opinions about it, which we
need to talk. We need to talk.
Which we may not have time for. I want to circle back. First of all, Joanne, I just want to thank you for your comments. It's lovely to have these discussions, and I agree with you. There are a ton of amazing people who are working really hard in terms of understanding, acknowledging, and respecting Māori worldviews. I think where I would love to see us go to, and this was a comment that I gave when I gave feedback on the trust bill, is how might we encourage Māori to be designers and developers in their own right in this space, and equally at the time that I saw it, and there may have been some changes at that time, the trust bill had no not even an encouragement. I was asking, could we have in the trust bill that in order to get accredited, you actually have to have had a conversation with Māori, with iwi and hapu. As an organisation, you have to have said, being able to share with us, we've sat down and worked alongside Māori, because there's so many things at the moment that don't present as barriers to you unless you are Māori, and a really good example of this is the resurgence we've seen in tā moko amongst our people, many women starting to get moko kauae. The scanners, at the facial scanners when you go overseas won't work if last time you didn't have a moko kauae and now you do have one. And very well recently, when I say recently, pre-COVID lockdown the whole world, a friend of mine literally in this all the way checked in the bags going to go, couldn't get through. So I was like, wow, that's an oversight. And using that same example, one of my dad, who's now in his 80s, one of his questions was to the lovely man at the gate. He didn't want to go through the facial scanner, and so he went and lined up manually. Thank goodness you can still do that if there's a couple of people there. And he said to the man, I don't trust what you're doing with my face, which harks back, I think, to some of these conversations of mistrust around, and I was like, wow, Dad, you truly feel that? And he's like, yeah. And then I was like, wow, so how are we going to make allowances for the belief systems? Like you said, many Indigenous people still say, and when I say we've moved on from that, I don't know that, I can't speak for every Māori person, but in general, most Māori seem to have found a way past that. But then to hear that that still kind of exists in my dad was interesting. I was like, yeah, he was not trusting that. He was like, I don't know what you're doing with that. That's my face. It's part of me and my wairoa, and I'm not okay with that. So I think at the end of the day, Māori are advocating for partnership, equitable partnership. We're asking for a seat at the table, and we're asking sometimes for us to be in the driving seat, and for those with expertise and knowledge to support us in the passenger seat and help to navigate us on this journey. But we want to be involved, and we haven't been in so many things in our history. So now's a wonderful time for us to give Māori the opportunity to sit at the table and know and understand that there's going to be times where we hand over the leadership to Māori and we support, and know and understand there'll be other times where we're invited to take that lead role. And that's, I guess, where I'm coming from. But we're seeing a resurgence of many people who are effective allies in this space, and that's what we need, and that's what we want.
Lovely, thank you. And so, as you were speaking, my mind was going to enrolling online for a digital, enrolling for a service with digital identity, and the kind of form fields, the questions that are being asked in terms of, typically it's name and date of birth, or the assertion of some sort of government issued document and so on. I was just thinking how that process might look slightly different with consideration for Māori perspective. So yeah, interesting.
Very different.
Yeah, and even the language, yes. As a speaker of Te Reo Māori, we can confidently say that I legally can speak Te Reo Māori in Aotearoa anywhere I want. And what I will say is that it is still very much a privilege rather than a right. I would love to tell you that it's my right, but I cannot walk into any restaurant and speak Māori. I cannot ring up the power company or the phone company and speak Māori. I can't walk into schools and just speak Māori. So if I get to speak Māori, it's still a privilege. Now, I would love to see us get to a place where anybody designing any kind of solution outside of identity solutions is promoting the use of Te Reo Māori, so that it's not my privilege, it's my right to engage in Te Reo Māori. I just had a conversation with someone the other day, and I was like, why didn't they make this the COVID scanner app in Te Reo? Just
Yeah.
you know, like there's very few words on that little, even just that one little scanner page, you know, so that I get to see the language that I can choose to speak anywhere and everywhere, that it's still not a privilege, that it genuinely becomes a right for me to do that.
Very interesting.
You know, it was a really young European girl who got Māori language into lifts.
Yes.
Right. All right.
I did pronounce
anecdote.
correctly. Yeah, I did. I watched that news. So we've got some amazing allies out there. I'm rapt about that. She was a pretty cool. I watched her article. It was awesome.
That's great. Any final closing comments? Because we need to wrap this up pretty quickly. Just to remind you all, of course, that Coffee Chat in 2 weeks' time. I do think we've got another presentation as well. I might be a little more organised to be able to promote that a little bit better, or to get with the marketing folks to make sure they do, and we probably won't be having another competing event that we have. And of course, if you'll see my background there, that's the event tomorrow, the AML CFT. Effectively, that evening event, the Connect event, is effectively a review, a panel, mostly panel and presentation sessions on the review of the current legislation as it goes into revision, and hugely subscribed. I think over 300 people, as I was saying to Janelle just as she came onto the call. And so I do encourage you to be there if you can, because actually so much of what is happening in AML CFT has resonance with what's happening in digital identity and so on. So we've got to walk these paths hand in hand. So with that, any final comments? We wrap it up. John is looking like he's ready to do something.
No, I'm trying to take a slightly wider perspective, because we spent quite a lot of time in Samoa, and they have a lot of similar problems. And one of the major problems has been truly really saying the families tend to change their names as they go from family to family.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's a major issue from that perspective for the government itself to be able to say, I need to tax this person because this is truly this person. Okay, you see what I mean? But because they change their name on a regular basis, it's a huge, great problem for the Samoan government, for instance, because they can't truly because they do change their names as they move from family. We're not saying it's wrong, is they just have no means of tracking and proving who they are.
Yeah, well, I mean, isn't that the thing, that actually translating that into Maori perspective, you would have you would talk about your whakapapa and
exactly,
and so on. So that would be the identifier. Right?
Yep. Yeah, but and the thing that came up about the speed of trust, I'm afraid I these days I work on a basis of trust but verify. Okay, yes. And it's becoming more, because of my background, okay, that with traditional systems cannot deal with the attacks and the speed and efficiency of them these days. So these days we have very much an attitude of, you have been hacked. Okay, get used to it, change your strategy, change your mindsets, because now you have to prepare for it.
Right. Wise words indeed. Right, folks. Wanting to wrap it up here so that we can free the Zoom channel for the next Tech NZ results. So that's great, and that's great. It looks like the slides, the link is into the chat now. Thank you so much, Janelle, for doing that. That's really helpful. That's really good.
And just sorry to let you know, I think in the I'll put the links to those 2 articles in there as well, so they're in there. I might just finish us with karakia if that's all right, and then we can finish our session. That'd be awesome. Thank you so much for the time today. There's so many more things to talk about, but really appreciate you coming along to start the conversation. Kia ora. Inuhia te pō whiri marama, tomo kia te ao whatu tangata, tātai ki runga, tātai ki raro, tātai ahurau, haumi e hui e tai ki e. Kia ora. Lovely to meet you.
Thanks for having me. It was really, really interesting, even though I was quite quiet. So next time.
Anya, it was a pleasure having you. Thank you.
Very
Lovely
much
to-
appreciated. Thanks.
Okay.